Was it madness? Could a king truly believe he could simply stroll into a forest and expect to meet a disciplined army for a polite chat? The air hung thick with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and something far more primal, the metallic tang of impending violence. June 23, 1314, Bannockburn. It wasn't a battlefield, it was a meticulously crafted trap, sprung with terrifying precision. The journey north had been a logistical nightmare, a slow-motion avalanche of men, horses, and enough food to feed a small kingdom. Edward's ambition, fueled by a burning desire to reclaim lost territories and a healthy dose of arrogance, had summoned a force of 21,640 souls, a veritable army drawn from the furthest corners of Europe. Welsh footsoldiers, hardened by the rugged terrain, were ordered to report to Roger. Lord Mortimer, the Justiciar of Wales, was tasked with assembling 3,000 warriors from the Principality, a task that seemed almost comical given the sheer scale of the operation. Every port was a hive of frantic activity, sailors scrambling to man ships, every county a recruitment center overflowing with eager, if often reluctant, volunteers. This wasn't a campaign, it was a declaration of war, a statement of intent etched in the sweat and desperation of 20,000 men. But the Scots weren't simply waiting for an invitation to a feast. James Douglas and his knights, clad in black surcoats that blended seamlessly with the twilight, moved like shadows. The night of Shrove Tuesday, 1314, was a cloak of secrecy, a deliberate act of defiance. They crept on their hands and knees, ropes ladder their silent partners towards Roxburgh Castle. The watchmen, lost in the revelry of Shrove Tuesday, didn't hear the rasp of rope against stone, the muffled movements of men determined to shatter the illusion of security. Few of the garrison, fueled by overindulgence and a misplaced sense of invincibility, lived to regret their blissful ignorance. Then, a different kind of audacity. Sir Thomas Randolph, a knight as ruthless as he was skilled, led a separate party to Edinburgh, a castle being built high above the town on volcanic rock. This wasn't just a siege, it was a surgical strike, a demonstration of Scottish resolve. He enlisted the help of William Francis, a young man who'd grown up within the castle walls, a local boy with a secret weapon knowledge of the rock face itself. Francis, a man accustomed to scaling the treacherous slopes, became the key to unlocking the castle's defenses. March 14th. The moon hid its face, casting the city in an eerie, unsettling darkness. The main Scottish force hurled itself against the East Gate, a desperate, chaotic assault against formidable defenses. It was a futile dance of steel and stone, a brutal ballet of courage and desperation. William Francis and a handful of loyal knights, armed with their rope ladders, moved with a chilling precision, slipping through the chaos, silencing guards in dark corridors and paving the way for their comrades. The English, confident in their superior numbers, were utterly unprepared for this silent, deadly infiltration, and then, the unthinkable happened. With the border fortress of Berwick, a strategically vital stronghold, now firmly in Scottish hands, Edward's grip on Scotland began to loosen. 3 castles remained, Bothwell, Dunbar, and Stirling, a shrinking archipelago of English power in a sea of Scottish defiance. While the Scots were busy dismantling the English war machine, Edward was frantically assembling his forces. Roger, tasked with raising 300 footsoldiers in South Wales, found himself facing a daunting challenge. Lord Mortimer of Chirk, the Justiciar, was ordered to mobilize 3,000 men from the Principality, a task that required ruthless efficiency and unwavering determination. Every port was a command center, sailors frantically preparing ships, every county a recruitment ground, brimming with men eager to prove their worth. Edward's campaign wasn't just about military might, it was a calculated investment, a gamble on the future of England. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering. 21,640 men, a human tide surging northwards, but the logistics were a nightmare. Wagons laden with supplies stretched for miles, a testament to the immense effort required to sustain an army of this size. The route north was a grueling test of endurance, a relentless march across challenging terrain. As the men trudged forward, their armor chafed, their boots wore thin, and their spirits began to flag. The supply train, a lumbering behemoth of wagons and pack animals, became a bottleneck, slowing the advance and testing the limits of the army's resilience. Imagine 20 miles a day for weeks on end under a relentless sun. The earth itself seemed to conspire against them, the ground unforgiving, the heat oppressive. The sheer weight of their equipment, armor, weapons, tents, and the endless supplies needed to feed an army of 20,000 transformed the march into a Herculean task. The air vibrated with the rhythmic thud of hooves, the creak of wagon wheels, and the weary sighs of men pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion. As the army converged on Stirling, the atmosphere thickened with anticipation. The strategic importance of the castle was undeniable. It controlled the gateway to the Highlands, a vital link in the Scottish defense. But the terrain surrounding Stirling presented a formidable challenge. The Earl of Gloucester, eager to prove his worth, chose to advance along a narrow, winding road that led through a dense wood known as the New Park. He hadn't accounted for the cunning of James Douglas. Hidden amongst the trees, a vast Scottish army lay in wait, a silent ambush designed to shatter the English advance. Hereford and Gloucester, blinded by their confidence, marched directly into the trap, oblivious to the deadly embrace that awaited them. Meanwhile, Sir Thomas Randolph, ever the strategist, had orchestrated a separate maneuver, securing Edinburgh Castle. He'd enlisted the help of William Francis, a local boy with an intimate knowledge of the castle's defenses, turning the fortress's very walls into a weapon. On March 14th, a moonless night, the Scottish force launched a daring assault, slipping through the castle gates and eliminating the guards in the dark corridors. Francis's knowledge proved invaluable, allowing the Scots to navigate the treacherous rock face and breach the castle's defenses with surprising speed. With Berwick, Edinburgh, and Stirling now under Scottish control, Edward's strategic position crumbled. The English were left with a handful of isolated strongholds, Bothwell, Dunbar, and Stirling, a stark reminder of their dwindling power in Scotland. But Edward wasn't one to surrender. He ordered Roger to raise 300 foot-soldiers in South Wales, a desperate attempt to bolster his depleted ranks. Lord Mortimer of Chirk, tasked with assembling 3,000 warriors from the Principality, faced a daunting challenge, a task that required ruthless efficiency and unwavering determination. Every port was a command center, sailors frantically preparing ships, every county a recruitment ground, brimming with men eager to prove their worth. The march north was a monumental undertaking, a logistical nightmare of epic proportions. 21,640 men, a human tide surging northwards, but the logistics were a nightmare. Wagons laden with supplies stretched for miles, a testament to the immense effort required to sustain an army of this size. The route north was a grueling test of endurance, a relentless march across challenging terrain. As the men trudged forward, their armor chafed, their boots wore thin, and their spirits began to flag. The supply train, a lumbering behemoth of wagons and pack animals, became a bottleneck, slowing the advance and testing the limits of the army's resilience. As the English army neared Bannockburn, the landscape shifted, transforming from rolling hills to a low-lying plain dominated by the River Forth. The road, a narrow ribbon of dirt, snaked its way through a dense wood, a claustrophobic passage that offered little room for maneuver. Bruce, a master of deception, had deliberately chosen this location, creating a natural barrier that would funnel the English into a deadly trap. The vanguards, led by Hereford and Gloucester, entered the wood, unaware of the danger lurking within. They followed the road, oblivious to the meticulously planned ambush that awaited them. But Pembroke, the most experienced commander in the English army, remembered his earlier encounter with Bruce at Loudon Hill, where the Scottish king had used earthworks and holes in the road to thwart a cavalry charge. Despite Pembroke's expertise, Edward had chosen to place his nephew, Gloucester, in command, a decision that fueled Pembroke's resentment and undermined his authority. As the first foot-soldiers entered the wood, sweating with exertion, they were confronted by a wall of Scottish pikemen schiltroms bristling with spears up to 16 feet long. The English knights, accustomed to open battle, found themselves trapped in a confined space, unable to turn their backs and ride to safety. Many men fell before they could break free, cut down by the deadly spears of the Scottish pikemen. Adding to the chaos, groups of Scotsmen began to run from the woods, attempting to disrupt the English advance. The knights, believing them to be in flight, pursued them, only to discover that they were facing a well-coordinated ambush. The Schiltrams held their ground, repelling the English charges with unwavering determination. The English archers, hampered by their distance from the front lines, were unable to effectively disrupt the Scottish formations. The lack of English strategic thinking became painfully apparent. Men were still arriving, and it was impossible to march on without them, for the Scots would simply emerge from the wood and kill them and take their baggage train. Thus, the English could neither move on, nor could they remain where they were, in a weak position. They could neither attack nor easily defend themselves. After much debate, Edward decided to advance a little across the Bannockburn and to form up there, ready in case the Scots should attack by night and not beyond reach of the arriving men and wagons. It was a catastrophic decision, probably the worst tactical move in English military history. The English foot soldiers, already exhausted, now had to spend the night without sleep as they found ways to cross the streams of the low-lying land around the village of Bannockburn. The village itself, abandoned in the face of the English advance, was pulled to pieces as men took doors and whatever wood they could find to make bridges and paths across the mud. But the army was too big to maneuver into such a small area in the darkness. All night men splashed around, hungry, tired, and shouting with frustration, completely demoralized. Then a single, devastating moment shattered the English ranks. As the knights rode through the wood, Bruce, mounted on a palfrey and armed only with a hand axe, turned to confront Sir Henry de Bohun, nephew of the Earl of Hereford. A clash of steel and fury erupted, a desperate duel that ended with Bruce cleaving through the knight's helmet and skull. The sight of their young commander falling, his axe still embedded in the shattered remains of his helmet, sent shockwaves through the English lines. Suddenly, the vanguard and the Scots found themselves face to face, committed to battle. With a cry, each side rushed forward and the fighting began. The Earl of Gloucester was pulled from his horse, but supported by his fellow knights he got to his feet and fought himself free of the enemy's clutches. In the close confinement of the woodland road, the English could not easily turn their back on their enemy and ride to safety, nor could they charge them down. Many men fell before they broke free from the trees, pursued for a short distance by the exultant Scots. As the battle raged, another contingent of English knights set off to ride around the wood, through the marshland across which the Bannockburn flowed. Their purpose was to see whether the English could surround the wood and so attack the whole Scottish army on all sides at once. They too were in for a surprise. Groups of men in close-drawn clusters, called Schiltrams, bristling with pikes up to 16 feet long, advanced from the woods towards them, blocking their way. As the heavily armored knights rode towards these Schiltrams, the Scots held their ground. The technique for breaking up such a dense thicket of pikes was to use archers to open up gaps, but the English knights had no archers. Their archers, in fact, were still dusting themselves off after their march or still traipsing over the hills several miles away. After a frustrating skirmish in which the Scots undoubtedly came off best, the English withdrew. Now the lack of English strategic thinking became painfully clear. Men were still arriving, and it was impossible to march on without them, for the Scots would simply emerge from the wood and kill them and take their baggage train. Thus, the English could neither move on, nor could they remain where they were, in a weak position. They could neither attack nor easily defend themselves. After much debate, Edward decided to advance a little across the Bannockburn and to form up there, ready in case the Scots should attack by night and not beyond reach of the arriving men and wagons. It was a catastrophic decision, probably the worst tactical move in English military history. The English foot soldiers, already exhausted, now had to spend the night without sleep as they found ways to cross the streams of the low-lying land around the village of Bannockburn. The village itself, abandoned in the face of the English advance, was pulled to pieces as men took doors and whatever wood they could find to make bridges and paths across the mud. But the army was too big to maneuver into such a small area in the darkness. All night men splashed around, hungry, tired, and shouting with frustration, completely demoralized. The principal reason underlying the English decision to camp in such a poor location was an assumption. They did not imagine for a moment that the Scots would attack them, and thus they did not imagine they would have to fight a battle on that very awkward site. They were aware of the possibility of a night attack, but they were sure that next morning they would be safe. Bruce himself was not certain he wanted to attack the English. His security lay in his position in the wood, not in the strength of his army, and his skill lay in his well-planned surprise attacks. Only when, after dark, Sir Alexander Seton and his men crept away from the English force to meet Bruce and tell him that the English were disorganized and demoralized, and that this was his one chance to defeat them in pitched battle, did Bruce put the question to his fellow band of captains. Their answer was unanimous. In the early hours of Monday, 24 June 1314, as first light spread, the English saw the Scottish army proceed out of the wood towards them. Edward Bruce led one battalion of men out, followed by James Douglas leading another, who in turn was followed by Thomas Randolph with another. Then as he watched, he saw the Scottish army to a man go down on their knees. "Look," he laughed. "They are begging for mercy?" "Yes," replied Sir Ingram Dumfrieville, "but not from you. They are asking God for forgiveness for their trespass against him, for those men will either win or die." Dumfrieville was not the only one who reckoned that the English army was not properly prepared. The Earl of Gloucester also considered that a day's wait would be to their advantage. Even now, as archers on either side began to loose their arrows off against one another, they did not need to join battle. But the king, who was becoming unnerved by his captain's hesitancy, accused Lord Gloucester of treachery and deceit. Gloucester, having had to suffer comments on his inexperience as a military leader, had had enough. "Today it will be clear that I am neither a traitor nor a deceiver," he shouted at the king, and at once he prepared his knights to ride forward. With trumpets blaring, shouts filling the air, and the massed praying of frightened men and the whinnying of terrified horses, the Earl of Gloucester and his 500 horsemen galloped towards the ranks of James Douglas. Other groups followed him in uncoordinated attacks, until within seconds the situation had slipped from the control of any commander. The king saw that there was now nothing to do but fight. With the heroic to the point of legendary knight Sir Giles d'Argentine on one side and the experienced Earl of Pembroke on the other, his helmet was strapped on and his weapons handed to him. Although no sources record the whereabouts of either Mortimer at this stage, it is very likely that they were with the king, also readying themselves for the charge. But as they waited on the brink of attacking, they saw a group of Scotsmen rush forward. To their horror, amidst the clanging of weapons on armor and the screams of dying men and horses, the Earl of Gloucester's great war horse was skewered by a pikeman and, rearing up in panic, unseated the Earl in its dying throes. The onlookers willed his men to push forward and save him, but at the very moment when he could have been saved, the Scots rushed forward with a great cry. His men could only watch astonished as he was hacked to death. The second greatest lord of the kingdom, second only to the Earl of Lancaster, died at the hands of Scottish soldiers in the churned-up mud of Bannockburn. Now the charge began in earnest, the horses galloping forward as Sir Giles d'Argentine led the rush to where the Earl had been struck down. Riderless horses which had been wounded on the pikes rushed here and there, creating confusion. Knights' armored destriers charged on to the pikes, so that the air was filled with the sounds of pike shafts splintering and cracking, as well as the screams of dying horses and men, and the war cries of both sides. At one stage Edward Bruce was struck down, but Thomas Randolph saw the danger in which the king's brother found himself and launched his men forward, his banner before him, and swept over the place to bring Edward Bruce to safety. The English redoubled their efforts, but Randolph held his ground and, despite another English onslaught, remained steady. If Edward had had an opportunity to talk through his strategy with his commanders, they would have counseled him to break up the Scottish lines using his archers. But as the overconfident English had not expected the Scots to attack them in the open, their archers were stationed on the ground furthest from the front. Only now did they come to the fore to unleash a volley of arrows on the Scotsmen. But their ability to break the Scottish line was limited. Moreover, Bruce had a few hundred horsemen in hand for just such a purpose as this, and he ordered this contingent to charge into the archers. The archers broke ranks and fled, leaving the knights on the field to fight out the hand-to-hand battle unaided, while the Scottish archers rained down arrows on the English. The question remains, could a king truly believe he could simply stroll into a forest and expect to meet a disciplined army for a polite chat?